Hi everyone, this is Emily, and today I'm going to be talking about comics. Um, so, comics, I think that the most important thing about comics is storytelling. And there's a distinction to be made between simple picture books and like novels that only have text. So I've done a bunch of comics. Most of the comics I've ever done were all fan fiction based off of video games. And, but over the years, my style has definitely changed and I got more towards just all original content instead of doing so much fan art. And it was kind of hard. Like, I would end up just not liking my own characters, but it's hard to come up with like original ideas that really stick. But I would say to that first you have to come up with your experimental stuff that might not seem like the greatest thing ever, but at least you've tried it and you know what doesn't work first. So so comics are basically a series of sequential images accompanied by text. So me personally, right now as a comic artist myself, I actually want the least amount of text as possible, because otherwise I feel as if I'm reading a book that's all text. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but actually, when I used to write stories in all text, people would just tell me, "Oh, your style of writing is always like just like comics. It reads like a comic." And then I'm just thinking like, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't even bother like writing. I should just make comics. So, I mean, when I was much younger, I did write really long stories, but they'd all be in comic form, and I'd always have a picture accompanied with my writing when I was in grade school. So, this right here is an old comic that I did back in high school for the high school newspaper. And I have a lot to say about it now because I can see like a lot of things that I would consider mistakes. For example, it's just so wordy. There are two columns here, okay? So possibly that might not be that clear. So one of the things about comics is that you definitely have to think about your audience, because it's not just reading a book where everybody knows that you read from left to right, at least like I guess in the English world. You know to read left to right and then wrap around all the way back to the left. So in this one, it might be confusing at first, I would say. But so another thing is that, for example, over here, I feel as if this might not be this drawing of a broken egg. I had to write down egg over here in order to show my audience that this is a broken egg. What is the point of like drawing this when like I had to write this down? So I think one of the key things about drawing comics is that when you draw something, it should be recognizable and self-explanatory instead of having to write down egg over here and trying so hard to like make sure you know this is a broken egg. So that's one thing, is when you're making your artwork, it's just do it right like the first time. If it's not the right the first time, fix it before you go and present it to other people. Because I remember when I was much younger, I would draw things and I'd be like, oh, it's too lazy. And if you as an audience don't understand what I was trying to go for, then it's your fault. But I would say, don't keep that attitude. Just make sure that everything that you draw is recognizable and can stand alone, because you're not always going to be there standing next to your artwork and explaining like what you're talking about. So another thing I would critique about this, my earlier work, is lack of consistency. Um, these these frames over here, they all vary in thickness. You can tell over here that I obviously drew this in, and part of it I used the marquee tool, and that's very shoddy. It's not very professional. So, and then all of a sudden I decide, oh, I'm gonna make like really thin lines over here. I probably didn't know how to use my tools very well. So, like I should have made a square and then given it thickness and then filled it in instead of making these out of 4 huge, really long rectangles, which is probably what I did, or something like that. Or actually filled in an entire black rectangle, then selected inside and then erased it. Not the best way to keep a consistent thickness of the frame. So like in GIMP, for example, the way you normally do that is you get the rectangle select tool, select, and then go to select and go to border, and you're going to have a consistent thickness over here. For example, you could do 5 pixels. In the comic that I'm working on right now, I do 8 pixels. So now you have like a uniform thickness all around. You don't have to do like all this stuff that I did before. And you fill it in, then you deselect it, and then there you have it. So very basic stuff. So also, like, the other thing I would critique about this is that I don't know, like, if everybody, I mean, I guess in my generation, like, maybe you should know who this character is. When I say Mother Goose is like one of those like childhood figures that maybe you may or may not have grown up with. But like, think about your audience, and also if you're presenting like some kind of celebrity figure, be sure to make sure that you draw them and make sure that they are recognizable. I mean, I'm a little iffy about blatantly saying Mother Goose, because I think it's always much better that you don't say it, but you draw it so that the drawing can, again, like, speak for itself without you having to, like, say all this stuff. So yeah, that's another thing, is my speech bubbles, they're also inconsistent. So it's basically you do the same thing except with the ellipse tool. So basically same exact thing. So so yeah, my earlier comics were very busy, but I would say it's much better than my even earlier comics, which here are my fan fictions. And this is the very first cover I ever did. And I tried to find ways of really selling it on the cover. I don't know if that's how you spell hysterical. So one of the biggest critiques that I ever got when I was around this age, when I was doing all these comics, was changing up my camera angles. So when you take a picture with your camera, for example, you're going to be omitting certain things, and you're going to include things within the view of the camera, and you have to be conscious of that. It's like all I'm including so far here are just characters for the most part, and I just basically have the same camera view. And as a beginner illustrator, relatively beginner, drawing from my head most of the time, things are very flat. Like later on, when I go and do like my latest comics, I really change it up. Like, for example, from over here, I changed over to top-down view, and my framing here, the reason why I choose top-down view is so that I can see all the characters that I need to show and continue to tell my story, right? Because if I did it from this this eye level view, from standing at like their height, it, you know, I wouldn't necessarily have, probably wouldn't have recognized this as the bunny rabbit, and we couldn't have recognized like how big this lake or whatever body of water this is that he's running around in order to get to the bunny. So camera framing is really important, like what you include and what you omit. It happens all the time. Like, for example, if we're showing the face of a character, for example. All right, let me draw it really quickly. For example, I'm thinking about like a scene from American Horror Story, like a woman's face. She's talking like that part where she was like, you know, I saw my baby and stuff. But then in the next shot of her, you see her chest, and it's like bloody because she was trying to deal with her baby, and it turns out to be like a monster, and she's bloody over here. So there's a reason why, for example, sorry for like picking a really gruesome example, but you frame the camera in a certain way, you focus in on the face, and then in the next shot you decide to only then reveal like the horror of like, you know, her baby turning out to be bloodthirsty instead of wanting to like breastfeed like normal, for example. Hopefully you could understand this example without having seen American Horror Story. And this was actually from season 1, Murder House. So that's a great example of what you decide to include and what you omit, at least at first or at any time, and then what you include later. So, can't help myself. Anyway, you probably can't recognize her as Lily Rabe, is it? Well, anyway. So camera. So yeah, that first critique that I got was like camera angles and like what you decide to frame. It's also like for the sake of drama and for the sake of the mood, because if you notice, like for example in like sitcoms, they tend to be zoomed out a lot more, and then in dramas like the top Netflix series, in any of them, you'll notice that there's so much more zooming in on the face. Zooming in on the face is very dramatic. Whereas if you're always zoomed out and you have a nice like full body view of like all your characters, it, like I'm thinking like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, or like really old one, Roseanne, anything like that. But later on, I guess they could zoom in more, and later on they have more shaky camera, but they only zoom in for any sense of drama or anything that the audience really needs to see, like a character drew something. So, yeah, so for example, like choosing your camera view is really important in order to show everything, and make sure you don't confuse your audience. Be sure that your audience can recognize things. Also, I would say don't have like way too much going on here, like in a given frame. And it's like, first we're focusing on this duck, and then he's still saying something. Like, this is really dramatic going on here, but also something else happened. Like, if I redid this comic, I would have, like, done this in a different frame, or focused on this actually in an additional frame, because it has to be shown like how close to the duck is this explosion happening. So anyway, yeah, these are my later Final Fantasy VII fan comics. So yes, I definitely did a lot more like zooming out, and also with my black and white added a lot more contrast. People like contrast. You'll see that a lot in Marvel comics with like making things very bold, but I myself, like personally, most of my background came from manga, as you could probably guess. But I've been really trying to get away from that and trying to just, do something different. So, I mean, before my first comics, or like these comics, just I feel like had way too much dialogue, and then I decided, you know what, I want to make a comic that just doesn't have any dialogue and that could speak for itself, and in fact could reach anybody regardless of their language. Like, you don't have to speak English in order to understand what's going on, as long as you know to read from left to right and to wrap around all the way back to the left. So another thing that I want to go over is pacing. So for example, over here, establishing shot over here. Okay, very nice and big and slow. And then over here, this is happening, relatively quickly, or I just wanted everything on the first page. And actually I animated that little bit, and like it depends on like if you want to include everything on the first page, or you really want to like really have your audience register what's going on. So I actually animated that part, and an animation is like probably the next step, I would say, in like from between like writing a book full of text, then comes, I would say, comics. Then, because comics are basically storyboards, because it gives you a sense of like the characters, the staging, the cameras. So here's the pacing for just like these four panels. So there's that bit of a nuance. Like I could have included that, but there's a lot of stuff like that omitted, but I would have but for the most part, I'm actually still trying to output something like say every week, for example, because it probably would have been like belaboring my point if I had included, for example, like the sigh of the dinosaur, like, whew, here we go. Oh, maybe, oh no. Like, so, but I think that every comic artist should really feel that, and at least stuff, and put all of that emotion of the character into each frame, or compact it. So, I mean, if you ever want to do like a 2D animation, then you at least have these, and then you can put all those details in later. So, but so yeah, there's pacing, and sometimes like when I change the pacing is when I have like some huge frames, like the only times when I have only like 3 or 2 frames in the entire page is like this is supposed to be a nice touching moment, and like really registering like, yes, this is the end, and this is like a really happy, loving family. It's a nice, I think it's a nice part to just have a nice big picture, even though it's like really simple and it's not that detailed. But even like for details, it's up to you. Nobody's asking you to draw like every single little detail or make the character's living space all crowded. For me, I was kind of trying to be minimalistic with this comic because I don't want to spend too much time, like even though like each page takes me like 6 to 10 hours to do, I still tried to simplify like the model of the characters, and also like the model of like the trees aren't that detailed at all, but it still like takes so much time to do. And also I feel like people have a taste for more simple things these days, and I feel like they're cuter that way. So another example of where I changed the pacing, only 2 frames over here, because in the frame before there's the anticipation. Okay, so lunch is ready, and Mamasaurus is calling to baby Dino. They sit down and they turn around. It's like, what are they looking at? Okay, and then I want to make like that dramatic entrance. It's like, this is what they are shocked at, and this is an example of like change of pace, and also like the drama, like make them nice and big and like shocking, but you know, in the grand scheme of things, it's probably not that big a deal, but this is like kind of like a children's kind of book. So climax and kind of like a follow through over here. He's walking and he's gonna sit down like nothing's wrong. So the pacing and your framing are like gonna be one of the primary sources of drama in your comic. And I guess like I didn't really have any sense of that. So in my earliest comics, another one of my mistakes was I just didn't have any sense of like planning. These were just done one page after another. And I didn't have a plan. I didn't have an ending. None of my fanfics have any endings. They were just like, oh, wouldn't it be funny like if this and this happened? So for example, I just really wanted Sephiroth to just like throw his sword like a boomerang, and I thought that was funny. And I wanted this and that to happen. And sure, but I think that like some of the best comics are ones that are planned out and overall have like a great story with all loose ends tied up. And so now when I do my comics, especially since they're original and I really want to be committed to my audience, I plan things out, okay? So let's look for like pages that correspond to these thumbnails. So these are from my first issue of my Dinosaurus comic. So for example, like page 21. It's good to plan out things this way, and when you're doing your thumbnails, it's not about getting things perfect, it's about making sure things are understandable to at least you. Because this could be fun for other people to look at, but primarily is to serve your own purposes. And it's a good thing to have for planning ahead and just getting a sense of like maybe like how many pages you're gonna have, and your pacing, what it's going to look like, how far you are from a certain event that's going to happen in your comic. So on page 21, this is what I have, okay? Okay, so what happens is this pterodactyl coming at this bunny, and yeah, I changed it around a lot in order to like suit whatever purposes. We wanted to get a sense of him zooming by baby dino and then coming in and swooping in, and I did like change this up a bit. Maybe there's another page that's a lot more consistent. So like maybe page 6 of bath time. So it could look a little different because the thumbnails are really small. They're only like, I don't know, 2 inches high on this page of my sketchbook. So this is what it looks like, and finally this is the final product of this. So this helps a lot, thumbnailing out your entire story for planning and making sure you have everything that you want. You could always change it up in the middle of your process. So I can show you like the different stages of like producing. Like one of my favorite pages that I did, what I really love about this page that I did is that there's like a feeling of a certain feeling, and then it completely turns around at the end of this page. So first thing I do is like nothing has to be perfect at the stage sketching. Then you outline and like really anchor those lines, and also do your marquee and then the consistent thickness. And every spacing in between I think should be, I mean, you don't have to do it like this. I just did it like that. And even early on I had the frames overlapping. And then finally, the final stages over here, I have it all colored. So the way I do it over here, for example, what I do is I fill in everything to make sure that I know what the positive space is. So this is what I would do like after the outlining step, is I would do this. I would just color in every block, and the color that I chose is because of what color dominates each of these frames. These are already greenish. The trees green. The tree leaves are green. So that's what I do. I've completed. I filled in most of the frame of what is the most common color. So, and then from there I just do the rest of the coloring. So I really like this because this character is clearly thinking that he's going to get away without getting a bath. He starts to climb up, and then there's a reaction going on. I don't even need to show like what exactly it is that's going on. I make the audience guess, which most of them are right. They know exactly what's coming for him. And then there's the drama of him like not getting away with not taking a bath. So, and this is the next page. And so we're zoomed in on this, and then once we zoom out, we get away from this, and then this is like a segue to actually what is really my favorite page. Is I think like the cutest page. So yeah, I am pimping out my own work, but I'd rather show my own work than like talk about other people's work and like say something wrong about it. So anyway, the next thing I'm going to talk about is think about your audience. Other than like recognizability of like characters, like celebrity figures, for example. So when you do your speech bubbles, you gotta make sure that you're thinking about where the viewer's eye is traveling. So for example, if I were to do like, where is the eye traveling? The eye is used to traveling on a comic page from left to right and wrap around, back to the left. So like, for example, if I were to, like, does it matter like what I read first? I don't know. Like, this is so I just can't say this enough. This is so jumbled. Like, make sure that the speech bubbles are in order by where you expect the viewer's eyes to go. And also, I've seen other people's comics. They're not necessarily professional. I'm not a professional comic artist either, but if you want to really be taken seriously, like, I mean, I guess I'm just gonna say it, like, spell things correctly, because if you don't spell things correctly, it just doesn't look, it makes your comic not look as polished. And if you want your audience to take you seriously, for one, have your spelling and grammar, punctuation correct. Unless, of course, for example, you have someone speaking like Patois or Creole or Ebonics or something, then fine. Like, you can put in a certain voice in it, but you have to know, like, what you're doing. Make sure that there's intention in everything. So, oh wow, this is another example. Like, these frames are really weird, but I was not consistent with that throughout, because then I changed to single line frames. This might be an example of like where the speech bubbles are a little weird. My eye would normally be like coming over here, probably his face, and then this, and then this. This is a little weird. I would have put this speech bubble like over here, in order to, and then this speech bubble over here. So that's an example. And make sure that your audience can recognize the context and your character. Because sometimes you might change like the character angle, I mean the camera angles, and then they might be disoriented. So, like, one possible thing, like, I've been reminded in college is to, if you're gonna flip your camera like 180 degrees or more or something like that, or make sure that everything is still recognizable. Like, you never really see the other direction. You're always facing towards the door in this house, and or towards the kitchen, and then we're simply backing up. So, like, if you ever like turn around, maybe like gradually do it, like turn the camera like 90 degrees so you get a sense of any part of the last shot in there, and then turn. So the next and last thing I'm going to talk about is if you want an audience. So this kind of goes for anything else that you're creating. In my case, like, I create artwork, I create comics, I create video games, or I have clients who create video games. And the thing is, you need to engage your audience. So that means uploading your content to as many hosting websites of whatever you're making. In this case, it's your comics. And I find that the best way to snowball your fans, aside from making sure your work is good, whatever that means, resonates with your audience, is presentable, whatever, assuming that, I find that the best way or the fastest way of getting a large audience is to update every single day. Have a new comic every single day. I don't even do that because I'm not getting paid to make these comics, and it takes me at least 5 hours to do one page. So I don't think I can do that every single day because I have to make some money with the rest of my time. So I try to do maybe once a week, but I see a lot of people, even myself when I was a lot younger, I started out a lot of comics and I never followed through. So what you need to do to distinguish yourself from other comic artists is to just keep doing it, keep releasing new pages, and try to be consistent in quality, in the time of your releasing your comics, because this is the way that I found to work the best, is definitely consistency. You might get tired of it later on, but those are the times, your opportunities to differentiate yourself from other comic artists who might not continue working on their comics. So like, this was a really big deal to me. I finished my first 30-page issue and I'd never finished a comic before, like not that long. Like this comic is like 50 pages long or something like that, and it was never finished. But even then, like for kids or anybody, I do recommend still doing something like this even if you don't finish. Best case scenario though, of course, in a perfect world, you do finish. And hopefully you've planned it out and know how to finish, tie up all loose ends. But this is still good practice for drawing, because instead of thinking about the drawing itself, you're thinking about telling a story. What I really liked about what I did was that I drew a lot, and I didn't even care about how perfect it was. Though yes, I did a lot of erasing, but at least I was improving. And I think that any kid who is like a huge fan of something, they should do fanfics too. I think that, or even if you're interested in doing that and you want to see your favorite characters experience some funny moments, and just make that happen, and you will get better at drawing if you just keep doing it and you're having tons of fun. So other than like being consistent, do something that you like doing, but also keep your audience in mind. But of course I'm not going to tell you not to do something, I don't know, avant-garde. I think that even if you do something that's way out there, I think that consistency and a series of something that has more than 3 segments, for example, more than 3 pages, would start to become a series of something. So give something to people to be a fan of. So right now, this comic series only has like a few hundred, no more than like 1,000 consistent followers, kind of. And I've definitely seen other people uploading almost every day, and they have like, I don't know, over 2,000 or thousands of followers. And so it'll take me a lot longer to get fans, but yes, that's basically how you do it. People have asked me, like, how have you gotten to the front page of this comic site? And I was like, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's because of the cuteness or simplicity of my stuff. It's easy to spread around. And also putting out pages like every day. So, but I honestly don't have a formula to it. things don't have to be cute. Things could have tons of action. You could have spent tons of time making illustrations with human characters. So, but anyway, that's pretty much all I know about snowballing fans. So, I hope that this video was helpful to you, and thank you for watching.